Bitcoin crashed below $100,000 yesterday, and there was mass fear in the market. There's a lot of speculation that the cycle is over. There's a lot of price targets across like crypto Twitter saying that we're going to go down to like 50K, 60K. And there's just like this, rumors of like unwinding of these Bitcoin treasury companies. There's a lot of fallout with specifically like Wintermute, massive market makers. A lot of speculation with like Binance being sued as well. So I'm going to get into what I think is going to happen next. And before I do so, make sure you're subscribed, smash this like button, and share the video with a friend. I've been updating you guys every step of the way for this bull market. And I think that whenever we consider where we are in this cycle, there's a lot of indicators that a lot of people kind of go to when it comes to assessing, whether we're in, the end phase of the cycle or what part of the business cycle we are. And I don't think that anything has really changed in my perspective. I think that these markets move in fear and greed pretty much. And there's a lot of macro uncertainty when it comes to these markets. Now, obviously we have these like tariffs that's kind of like weighing down on the US economy. We have obviously inflation, we're in quantitative tightening. That should come to an end sometime in December. And on a time horizon basis, we are pretty much at the end of this 4-year cycle, but I think that you can't ignore the landscape of where we are, relatively speaking, to the macro terms, because crypto is a very small market cap in respect to any other market, and it pretty much lives on liquidity. So whenever there's not any kind of liquidity in the system, which means like, higher interest rates, whenever we're basically taking money out of the economy, it's not really good for crypto. And so what I think is happening right now is we have obviously pro legislation kind of coming in. We're going to have bills being passed, hopefully sometime after this government shutdown, which I do think is going to come to an end probably within a week. I think we officially hit like a record, days that the government's been shut down, and nobody wants to see this. So I wouldn't be surprised to see that, that could be a really bullish catalyst that's going to kind of like spring us off this like $98,000 low that we've put in basically yesterday. And I think that we're probably going to at least go back to, $116,000, $120,000, just because there's so much short liquidity built up above us. And I think from there, we'll reassess whether the cycle is going to be in or whether we're going to continue and trade higher. I'm kind of leaning in the camp that we're going to go higher because obviously interest rates are going to be cut. I think the government shutdown is going to come to an end. And not to mention, we're going to have quantitative easing starting in December. And that's going to be a little bit of a lagging sort of factor. But I think that as time plays out going into next year, I think that that's going to drive a lot of liquidity going into the markets. And obviously stocks are at an all-time high. Gold hit an all-time high, and now it's kind of consolidating. And so what usually happens is people will take profits from these and they'll go into a more speculative, asset. Couple that with positive legislation and just bills being passed. So I think that Bitcoin is going to be the main beneficiary of this. And I think that a lot of liquidity is going to initially go into Bitcoin before going into altcoins, just because we're so uncertain right now with how things are going to shape out, what altcoins are even going to stand the test of time. I have a few, but I think that you can't ignore that Bitcoin has been the main character this whole cycle. And I think that you can't ignore that going forward, considering that most countries are trying to accumulate Bitcoin. We have the US government, super pro Bitcoin, super pro crypto. And I think that if you're somebody that is on the fence of what's going to happen and you want to stay exposed to the market, it makes the most amount of sense, in my opinion, just to be allocated to Bitcoin. Just because if we do go into this bearish trend, it's not uncommon to see altcoins go down 60 to 90%, even the really good ones. I watched Solana go below $1 all the way up to $2.50, and then it crashed all the way down to $9. So it can still happen, right? And I think that, obviously if things go up, Bitcoin basically has to be the first mover. So you're going to have the upside being in Bitcoin, and you're going to minimize the downside. And then obviously if we get extremely bullish, well, then you can obviously speculate and go into more altcoins. Again, I'll update you guys on which ones I'm specifically looking at. If you want to know, drop that in the comments. I'll make a video on this. Now, I think that my kind of, analysis is you want to look at these high time frames and see what makes sense whenever it comes to being intact when it comes to these cycles. And pretty much, I think that, hitting about $98,000, I think that was really important, because on a weekly structure, we need to maintain above that to be intact. And I think that it's good that we kind of bounced off of it. It shows a lot of support, and 100K is basically a really big psychological level when it comes to Bitcoin. And I think as long as we remain above that on a weekly close, I think that we're still intact. And at a worst case scenario, if you scroll out to the monthly, we have a structure shift around $75,000, which basically means as long as we stay above $75,000 on a monthly basis, we're still pretty much on a higher low and intact for the bull run. And I think that now, since we have all of this, liquidity being kind of injected into the system, we have these Bitcoin treasuries, we have these Bitcoin spot ETFs. I think that that's going to drive a lot of just underlying buying pressure. So I do think in a worst case scenario, like even if we go into this bearish trend, I don't think that the sell pressure is going to be as bad, and I don't think the price is going to go as low, specifically for Bitcoin. And I think that you could also look at this as a prolonged period. So maybe this is just a big consolidation before trading a lot higher. I've had price targets around $200,000 for this cycle. I still think we're going to see that. And if we do, it's probably going to be put in sometime, December-ish, maybe January is my opinion. And then we kind of see what goes on from there. Because it is very possible, in my opinion, that we see a super cycle when it comes to Bitcoin, just because of the overall environment, especially if we start lowering interest rates, we get the Fed, Jerome Powell, out of the office. I think that Trump wants to replace him for somebody that's going to want to weaken the dollar and pretty much make interest rates go to zero. And that's the kind of environment that you want to see when it comes to assets like Bitcoin. So to kind of summarize, I do think that for now, we have put in a local bottom. I'll update you guys on what I'm seeing. And I do think that we continue to trade higher. And if Bitcoin can kind of find its footing and go up to about $116,000, I think that altcoins are going to really kind of mean revert and go up a lot more. And then we'll kind of decide where we go from there. At the very least, they have to liquidate all these short positions, because just like we had so much long positions, the exchanges can't really afford to leave those traders in because they have to pay them out if they ever take profits. And so the main reason, or the main way that these exchanges make money, it's not necessarily on making the assets go up, it's liquidating these traders up and down and fees. So it just makes a lot of sense. Even if we are going to go a lot lower and we go into this harsh bearish cycle, you're going to have to go up and grab that liquidity before going back down. So that is the good news. And again, everything is time sensitive. So make sure you're subscribed, and I'll see you all soon. Bye.